The prototype engine sparked and hissed, sending wisps of burnt circuitry into the San Francisco boardroom. James Trafford's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. 6 weeks. 12 PhDs. And you still can't keep it alive for 15 minutes. The engineers flinched. Then she walked in. Joanna Mica stepped through the glass doors with her toolcart, her grease-stained uniform catching the afternoon light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. 40 executives turned their heads, some confused, others contemptuous. The security team had almost stopped her at the lobby. They thought she was janitorial. James's jaw tightened. Here we go again. We ordered engineers, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Not auto shop charity cases. Joanna didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She simply approached the scorched engine and listened. It's misaligned in its harmonic sync, she said, her voice calm as still water. I can hear it fighting itself. The room erupted in laughter. James leaned forward, his tailored suit catching the light the same way her father's old work jacket never had. Something in his expression shifted. Not interest, but sport. He smirked. Tell you what, miss? Mica. Joanna. He stood, circling the engine like a predator. Here's a deal. Fix this machine. Fix it before my elite engineers do, and I'll marry you right here. In front of all of them. He snapped his fingers. Silence flooded the room. The kind of silence that comes before something breaks. And when you fail, and you will fail, security escorts you out permanently. 60 seconds. Starting now. Joanna's eyes met his. There was no fear in them. No anger. Just a clarity that made him pause for half a second. Then I'd better not waste time, she said. And she began. If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's begin. Behind her, the skyline of San Francisco stretched like a wall of glass and judgment. Trafford Dynamics' crown jewel, the Eve 7 adaptive engine, sat dead before the most powerful investors in the city. The company's future, a $500 million international contract, depended on a machine that refused to live. James Trafford was Silicon Valley royalty. 43 years old, impossibly polished, his empire built on precision, pressure, and fear. To the media, he was a visionary. To his employees, he was a storm in a suit. His word could end careers in a heartbeat. And now a 26-year-old woman from a Detroit auto shop had just defied him in front of his kingdom. The cameras kept rolling. Trafford's PR team was broadcasting the final engine test live to investors in Tokyo and Berlin. No one had planned for this scene. No one expected her to stand her ground. Joanna's fingers hovered above the engine, feeling its residual vibration. She could hear it. The rhythm was wrong. Not software, not coding, a heartbeat out of tune. James crossed his arms, waiting for her to embarrass herself. But for the first time that morning, he looked uneasy. Because Joanna didn't look scared. She looked like someone who'd been here before. Trafford Dynamics wasn't built for people like her. It was a glass temple of innovation, where billion-dollar ideas were born under fluorescent lights and crushed by corporate egos. James ruled it like a god of logic, all numbers and efficiency. But logic couldn't fix what arrogance had broken. And for Joanna Mica, this wasn't just another job. It was unfinished business, one that began in a Detroit garage under the hum of an old engine that used to sing in perfect harmony. Trafford Dynamics didn't look like a company. It looked like a cathedral of control. A 60-story glass monolith jutting into the San Francisco skyline. Its mirrored panels caught the morning sun and threw it back like a challenge. Inside, everything gleamed, marble floors, titanium railings, and minimalist decor that whispered one message: perfection or extinction. No one spoke above a hush on the executive floors. Conversations died the moment the CEO's footsteps echoed down the corridor. The staff joked privately that the building itself feared James Trafford, that if he ever yelled loud enough, the lights would flicker. He wasn't the kind of man people met. He was the kind they survived. James Trafford, 43, had built his empire from the smoldering wreckage of 3 bankrupt startups and 1 ruined partnership. The story was Silicon Valley legend. A college dropout who turned a $200,000 seed fund into a $1.8 billion robotics empire. But behind the magazine covers and tech conference charm lay a reputation that chilled every floor beneath him. Genius, yes. Visionary, maybe. Empathetic? Never. He didn't tolerate mistakes. He didn't repeat them either. For James, failure was an infection, something to cut out before it spread. That philosophy built Trafford Dynamics into a fortress of efficiency. And it worked. Until now. The company's heart, its crown jewel, sat silent in a glass lab at the top of the tower. Project Eve 7. Eve stood for Enhanced Vehicle Engine, an adaptive power unit designed to revolutionize robotics, drone transport, and autonomous vehicles. The engine could theoretically power a car for weeks without refueling, using an AI-driven feedback loop to self-regulate performance. On paper, it was flawless. In reality, it was dying. For 6 weeks straight, Eve 7 had refused to stay online. Each test ended the same way. 14 minutes and 37 seconds. Then a soft chime. Then failure. The diagnostics flashed the same mocking phrase every time. Error code 88. Harmonic disruption detected. It was an engineer's nightmare, an unsolved ghost in the machine. Every failure chipped away at Trafford's invincible image. Every test broadcast a reminder that perfection had limits. The board whispered about delays, shareholders circled like vultures, and James's temper grew shorter by the day. The next investor demo was less than 24 hours away. $500 million in international contracts depended on that engine running without error. One failure in front of cameras, and Trafford Dynamics would bleed credibility overnight. So James did what he always did. He pushed harder. His engineers worked 18-hour shifts. Coffee cups multiplied on every workstation like scars of exhaustion. Code teams rewrote the AI from scratch. Hardware techs replaced entire modules. And still, 14 minutes and 37 seconds. Dead. Every time. That morning, the boardroom had become a war zone. Executives stood around the smoking prototype as James shredded through reports, voice booming against the glass walls. You had 6 weeks. 6. I could have trained interns to fail faster. No one dared meet his eyes. Then, amid the chaos, Joanna Micah had walked in. She wasn't supposed to be there. Her name wasn't even on the access log. Joanna worked for Metrofix, a third-party maintenance firm contracted to service Trafford's company vehicles. Her assignment that day was routine: inspect a fleet of electric vans in the underground garage. But when a security glitch flagged her badge near the executive elevators, she'd been rerouted upstairs to assist with urgent mechanical diagnostics. Fate, or maybe irony, had put her right at the epicenter of a billion-dollar disaster. No one noticed her at first. A woman in a gray mechanic's uniform didn't belong on the 59th floor, not where the suits drank imported espresso and spoke in profit margins. But when she leaned over the dead engine, wiped her hands on her apron, and said, "It's fighting itself," the entire room froze. James Trafford had turned. And for the first time that morning, he smiled, not with kindness, but with disdain. Now, hours later, the building hummed with tension. Rumors spread like static. Executives whispered that the CEO had made a marriage bet, with a mechanic in front of half the board and the cameras. Others said it was staged PR, another Trafford stunt to show dominance. But anyone who had seen the look in his eyes knew it wasn't theater. It was fury wrapped in pride. James sat in his office, overlooking the bay. The city sprawled beneath him, perfect and predictable, unlike the chaos inside his own walls. His reflection shimmered in the window. A man who built perfection and couldn't control imperfection when it stared him down. He replayed the moment in his head. Her voice. Calm. Certain. No hesitation. You think you can fix this? He had spat. Then fix it. And she hadn't flinched. Most people broke under him. His tone, his reputation, his shadow. But Joanna hadn't. Her silence had unnerved him more than any failure. It was the quiet of someone who knew more than she was allowed to say. He hated that. Downstairs, the R&D floor pulsed with anxious energy. The Eve 7 prototype sat under heavy guard, waiting for another round of diagnostics. Engineers debated variables on digital whiteboards, arguing over algorithms, torque ratios, and AI learning models. Not one of them mentioned harmonic balance. Not one even thought to check mechanical rhythm. Joanna, meanwhile, sat alone in the service bay, flipping through the engine's maintenance logs. She traced her finger along the calibration readings and frowned. Something felt off. The resonance data didn't match the machine's specs. It was like someone had tuned an instrument to the wrong key. She closed her eyes, imagining the engine's hum, offbeat, strained, begging for correction. I've heard this before, she thought. Just not here. Somewhere deep in her memory, another hum rose, warmer, familiar, from a Detroit garage that smelled of oil and sawdust. Her father's voice echoed. Every engine's got a heartbeat, Joe. You just have to listen. Her jaw tightened. Maybe fate had brought her here after all. Above her, in the mirrored office, James stared down at the same floor. He saw her silhouette moving between engines and cables. For a moment, he didn't see a mechanic. He saw an equation he couldn't solve. He turned away sharply, muttering to himself, "She'll be gone by morning." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure whom he was trying to convince. Detroit, the city where engines were born, and sometimes where they died. Before the marble floors and glass towers of San Francisco, there had been the cracked concrete of Micah's Auto and Machine, a modest one-story garage wedged between a barber shop and a liquor store on the east side. The sign was faded, the lights temperamental, but to 16-year-old Joanna Micah, it was sacred ground. That garage was her first classroom. Her father, Ezekiel Micah, was her first professor. He wasn't a man of degrees or patents. He was a man of sound. He could tell a misfire by rhythm, a dying belt by pitch. "Engines talk to you, Joe," he used to say, leaning over a carburetor with grease up to his elbows. "Problem is, most folks don't listen." She listened. Every night after school, while other kids scrolled through their phones or hung out downtown, Joanna was under a hood with her father, learning the language of steel and current. When she got her first scholarship letter from MIT, Ezekiel had cried, quietly, so she wouldn't see. He never told her that he'd sold his own custom engine prototype just to afford her flight. Joanna had left Detroit at 18, believing she was leaving poverty behind. At MIT, she was a prodigy, the girl who could hear diagnostics the student professors whispered about. She designed hybrid drive systems that ran smoother than any in her class. She spoke less, observed more. But on her second year, a phone call ended it all. Her father had collapsed behind the workbench. Heart failure. She came home to a dead engine, unpaid bills, and a half-finished schematic lying across his desk, labeled Adaptive Resonance Drive. It was his dream, an engine that could self-correct in real time using harmonic vibration patterns, syncing mechanical and digital intelligence like a heartbeat. She recognized the handwriting, the equations, the notes in the margin. She also saw the foreclosure notice taped to the door. MIT could wait. Her father couldn't. So she stayed. Years passed. Joanna ran the shop herself, fixing transmissions for truckers and deliverymen, teaching herself microcontroller programming at night. She barely made enough to keep the lights on, but she refused to sell the schematic. It was the only piece of her father she had left. Then came the corporations. Emails. Offers. Pressure to license the design. She refused every one of them, until her shop's landlord sold the building out from under her. By the time she found out, it was gone. Her father's old plans, his prototype casing, even his tools. 3 months later, the Eve 7 prototype appeared on a tech blog. Same design, same structure, even the same oscillation ratios in the patent. The company's name burned into her memory. Trafford Dynamics. Back in the present, Joanna sat on the cold service bay floor beneath the gleaming towers of that same company, flipping through its diagnostic logs. Her calloused fingers traced familiar equations on the display screen, numbers that pulsed like memories. Her throat tightened. They hadn't even changed the variables. A metallic clang echoed down the hall. She looked up to see 2 engineers walking past, laughing under their breath. Her throat tightened. They hadn't even changed the variables. A metallic clang echoed down the hall. She looked up to see 2 engineers walking past, laughing under their breath. Did you see the CEO's face when the mechanic talked back? Thought he'd explode. Yeah, the other replied, chuckling. Bet he fires her before sunrise. Joanna kept her eyes down, letting the words pass through her. She'd learned long ago that the fastest way to disarm arrogance was silence. The hum of the Eve 7 engine, even when idle, was off by a half tone. She could hear it through the floor. Something inside it was unbalanced. Not broken, just unheard. Across the hall, James Trafford was pacing. He had a headache that pulsed behind his eyes like a strobe light. The board wanted progress reports, the investors wanted guarantees, and the engineers wanted permission to rebuild the engine from scratch, a PR disaster waiting to happen. Every problem he faced could be solved with logic except the one sitting in his lab. The mechanic. The girl who looked at him like she wasn't afraid to lose. He tried to focus on his notes, but the memory of her composure grated on him. She didn't panic, didn't beg, didn't even blink. He'd humiliated her in front of everyone, and she'd met his challenge with calm eyes and that maddening phrase, "Then I'll start the timer." He scowled, muttering to himself. Arrogant little. But the words didn't land right. They sounded hollow. Like he was the one who'd been tested and failed. By midnight, the building was quiet again. Only one light glowed in the lab. Joanna stood over the open engine, its components spread like organs across a steel table. She held a small screwdriver between her fingers, rotating a coupling gear. The faint vibration hummed up through her palm. There it was again, that subtle harmonic dissonance her father used to call the whisper. She smiled faintly. "It's you, isn't it?" She whispered back. The same rhythm. The same flaw. The Eve 7 wasn't a new invention. It was her father's dream, rewritten by strangers who didn't understand its soul. They'd copied the skeleton and ignored the heartbeat. Joanna reached into her toolkit and pulled out a worn micrometer, its handle engraved with a tiny EM, her father's initials. She began adjusting the alignment of the coupling, whispering to herself in rhythm with the clicks. The readings on the diagnostic display shifted slightly. Smoother, cleaner. The hum steadied. For a few seconds, the engine's oscillation frequency held perfect balance. Then a flicker. Then silence. It shut down again. But this time Joanna smiled. It wasn't dead, it was close. She exhaled, leaned back, and wiped her hands on her apron. "You're still in there," she murmured. "And I'll bring you back." Upstairs, James sat in his office with the city spread beneath him like a chessboard. He caught sight of movement below, a figure in coveralls alone in the lab, working long past her shift. The security feed zoomed automatically. He watched her for a long moment, the way she moved, the focus in her eyes. She wasn't guessing. She was listening. Something stirred uneasily in him. Not attraction, not yet. Recognition. She reminded him of someone he used to be, before power turned ambition into armor. He switched off the monitor. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was curious. By dawn, the Eve 7 lab was still glowing. And the woman nobody saw, the one they'd mocked and underestimated, wasn't just repairing an engine. She was about to rewrite history. By the time the sun rose over the San Francisco skyline, the rumor had become legend. Word of the marriage bet spread like wildfire through Trafford Dynamics. Executives whispered about it in the elevators. Engineers texted each other under their desks. By 9 a.m., the story had already leaked to a few tech blogs. CEO makes bizarre bet with mechanic during prototype meltdown. James Trafford pretended not to notice. He walked into the glass-walled boardroom as if he still owned gravity. Behind him, his assistant trailed nervously with a tablet. "Sir, the PR team is suggesting we clarify that the bet was a joke." "Don't," he cut in. "If anyone asks, it was motivation. A test. Nothing more." He adjusted his cufflinks, turned toward the window, and stared out at the shimmering bay. But even his reflection seemed to mock him. Eyes a little more tired, jaw set too tight. He had built this company on power, and now that power was cracking in the hands of a mechanic half his age. Downstairs in the testing lab, Joanna Micah stood over the Eve 7 engine, tightening the last bolt she'd adjusted overnight. She'd barely slept. The sound of the engine's uneven hum haunted her dreams. When she looked up, a shadow passed across the glass wall. James, flanked by a small army of engineers and investors. His polished shoes clicked against the floor like a countdown. "Morning, Miss Mechanic," he said coolly. "I trust you've had time to rehearse your miracle?" Joanna wiped her hands with a rag, her expression unreadable. "Engines don't rehearse, Mr. Trafford. They either work or they don't." A murmur rippled through the room. James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "All right, everyone," he announced, his voice amplified by the sleek audio system. "Since we're apparently entertaining alternative methods today, let's make it interesting." He gestured toward the glass ceiling. High above them, a small red light blinked to life. "The cameras. Investors in Tokyo and Berlin are watching this live," he said, pacing. "They deserve a show. Miss Micah here believes she can do what our engineers could not. Let's see it." One of the engineers leaned toward her, whispering, "You don't have to do this. He's setting you up." She didn't look at him. "Then he's going to be disappointed." The live stream began with a single sentence projected across the display. Eve 7 live diagnostic test. Phase repair. Thousands of investors, analysts, and employees tuned in from around the world. Within minutes, the view count ticked upward. #Mechanic Challenge started trending before the first spark. James stood at the head of the room, arms crossed. "Let's make this fair," he said. "You have 1 hour. You'll be working under full observation. No assistance. No edits. No safety net." Joanna met his eyes, calm and steady. "I don't need an hour." "Then by all means," he said, "prove it." The engine sat like a silver beast on the table. Cords snaking across its chassis, coolant dripping onto the tile. The air smelled like hot copper and ozone. Joanna reached for her wrench. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost graceful. "Silence," she said softly. "I need to listen." A few engineers laughed under their breath. James's smirk widened. She needs to listen to it. But then she leaned in close to the machine, fingertips grazing the casing, and the room fell quiet. A low hum filled the air, uneven, almost imperceptible. Joanna closed her eyes. Her lips moved as she counted beats under her breath. 1821. "Too high," she murmured. "Your coupling's off tempo." She removed the access panel, tightened a connector, and checked the vibration with a micrometer. The tool clicked softly in rhythm. One of the engineers blinked. She's tuning it." Another frowned. "That's not even a calibrated instrument." Joanna ignored them all. Her hands moved with certainty. She wasn't guessing. She was remembering. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "Find the heartbeat, Joe. Every engine has one." From his corner, James felt an unexpected chill. Something in her focus, the calm, the unshakable rhythm, unnerved him. For the first time in years, he felt like an outsider in his own lab. He leaned toward his CTO. "She's improvising. This isn't procedure." The CTO hesitated. "Sir, I don't think it's improvisation. I think it's intuition." Joanna straightened, ready for ignition. James blinked. "Already?" She nodded. "You said seconds, not hours." He gestured to the control panel. "Proceed." Joanna pressed the ignition key. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life, its metallic hum filling the room. For a moment, everything held still. The screens flickered green. Then, after 30 seconds, the engine stuttered and shut off. Laughter broke the silence. James exhaled sharply through his nose. "Well," he said, clapping once, "I suppose that's—" "Wait," Joanna said. "That wasn't failure. That was feedback." She adjusted one final bolt, reached down, and twisted the harmonic stabilizer manually. A single note rang through the room, a steady, clean vibration. The hum evened out. "Now," she whispered. "Try again." The engine came alive. This time it didn't cough or strain. The were sharpened into a smooth, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the glass walls. Diagnostics flashed across the monitors. Temperature normal. RPM stable. Error. None. The crowd leaned forward. 1 minute. 2. 5. No fault. At the 10-minute mark, engineers exchanged stunned glances. At 14 minutes and 37 seconds, the point where it always failed, the screen remained green. "Impossible," someone breathed. James's eyes widened. His reflection glowed in the steel casing. The machine purred like something alive. When the timer hit 20 minutes, the boardroom erupted. Investors clapped on the live stream feed. The chat exploded. Hashtag Mechanic Challenge. Hashtag Eve7 Alive. Hashtag Trafford Bet. Joanna removed her gloves, stepping back slowly. Her face was calm, unreadable. James turned to her, still stunned. "How did you?" She wiped a streak of oil from her cheek. "You were listening to your engineers." "I listened to the engine." Silence stretched between them. Then applause thundered. For the first time, James didn't have a comeback. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not a mechanic but the one person in the room who understood the thing he'd spent millions trying to control. Outside, the live stream's viewer count hit 300,000. Investors cheered. Tech journalists started writing. But in the shadows of the data feed, one viewer paused the video at a single frame. Joanna's hands, hovering over the open chassis, touching the harmonic drive, the same layout from an old patent that never made it to market. An old name on the archived blueprint read, Ezekiel Micah. By the time the engine powered down, Joanna's calm was absolute. She'd just saved a billion-dollar company. But deep down she knew this wasn't triumph. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The applause had barely faded when the silence returned. By noon, the live stream replay of Joanna's repair had hit 1 million views. #MechanicChallenge topped every tech feed in America. Investors called it a miracle. PR called it a win. But inside Trafford Dynamics, the mood was anything but celebratory. In the executive suite, James Trafford sat alone, replaying the moment again and again. Her hands, her focus, her voice saying, "Listen." It wasn't luck. It wasn't guesswork. It was mastery, the kind that came from years of understanding something deeper than data. He rubbed his temple, trying to push away the unease creeping under his skin. He'd humiliated her in front of the world, and she'd saved him anyway. The cameras had caught everything: his arrogance, his mockery, and her quiet victory. And now the board was demanding a follow-up press event. "Turn it into a success story," his PR chief said. "Make her the face of diversity," the marketing head suggested. James ignored them all. He didn't care about optics right now. He wanted answers. How had she done it? How had she known? Down on the R&D floor, Joanna was asking herself the same thing, but her question ran deeper. Her victory had bought her access. For the first time, the internal systems weren't locked to her badge. She could see the maintenance archives, the part suppliers, the original blueprints of Eve 7. And there it was. The familiar math. She froze. The harmonic ratios. The torque modulation equation. Even the rotational phase delay. Identical to the one written in her father's notes over a decade ago. The same spacing. The same mistake in the constant. Her throat went dry. She whispered, "No, that can't be right." But it was. She scrolled further. Buried in the metadata of the archived prototype. File origin. Dynamic Future Holdings LLC. She knew that name. Her father had once mentioned it. A small acquisition firm that bought struggling patents from small inventors for research purposes. She clicked open the purchase record. Date: May 9, 2015. Acquired asset: Adaptive Resonance Drive. Inventor: Ezekiel Micah. Transfer sum: $6,000. Joanna's hand trembled on the mouse. $6,000. That's what her father's life's work had been worth to them. Across the building, James was in the boardroom with Dr. Farah Levinson, his CTO, a brilliant woman who had kept Trafford Dynamics alive through 3 product recalls. She stood by the screen, watching the replay of Joanna's test. "Do you know what she did?" he asked. Farah nodded slowly. She corrected the harmonic offset manually. No software. No calibration. "That's not possible," James said. "It is," she replied. "If you understand the system's resonance feedback loops by instinct." James frowned. Instinct? That's not engineering. Farah glanced at him. "It's something better. It's inheritance." He stared at her. "What are you implying?" Farah hesitated. The Eve 7's original concept predates our in-house design. It came from a third-party acquisition, a small patent from a Detroit inventor. The documentation was incomplete, but the foundation was his. James's chest tightened. "Name?" Farah turned the tablet toward him. "Inventor. Ezekiel Micah." For a long moment James said nothing. The sound of the city outside, the hum of cars, the drone of machines, seemed to fade. Micah. It hit him like an aftershock. He remembered the girl's name on the access log. Joanna Micah. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" he said quietly. Farah sighed. "It was years ago, James. You signed the acquisition papers yourself. It was part of a bundle deal. 20 patents, most useless. None of us thought." He cut her off with a wave. "Get me the files." Downstairs, Joanna printed out the purchase order and folded it into her pocket. She needed air. The cafeteria was nearly empty. She grabbed a cup of water and sat in the corner, staring out the window. Across the city, sunlight glinted off glass towers, all the same steel gray, all built on the same kind of ambition that had stolen her father's dream. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Meet me on level 47. Midnight. You deserve to know the rest. ML. Marcus Layton." She remembered him, the lead systems engineer who had hovered nervously during the live stream, the only one who hadn't laughed at her. At 11:57 p.m., Joanna entered level 47, the restricted archive floor. The air was cold and metallic, smelling faintly of machine oil and dust. Rows of inactive prototypes and old servers lined the walls. Marcus was waiting beside a flickering screen, looking uneasy. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. He exhaled. "Because I've been watching this company pretend to innovate on the backs of people like your father for years." He opened a digital file. "This is the original research set. I thought it was ours, until I compared the old calibration notes." He signed them. "EM." Joanna stared at the screen, at her father's handwriting scanned into the digital schematic, his notes in the margins. "Too sensitive to ego-driven coding. Must trust the engine's natural rhythm." Her throat closed. She remembered him saying those exact words in the garage. Marcus looked at her carefully. "You fixed the engine because you understood what he meant. The others never did." Joanna's jaw tightened. "Does Trafford know?" He nodded. "He knows now." Upstairs, James sat in his office surrounded by old patent files and legal memos. He'd read everything. The sale, the transfer, the revisions his R&D team made. The truth was undeniable. Trafford Dynamics hadn't invented the Eve 7. They'd bought it cheap, erased the name, and claimed the glory. He stood by the window, staring at his reflection again. For the first time, he didn't recognize the man staring back. He'd spent his life preaching precision and progress, but all he'd really built was a monument to someone else's silence. He sank into his chair, running a hand through his hair. "God, what have I done?" Meanwhile, down in the archives, Joanna gathered the printed files into her bag. "Marcus," she said quietly, "if I go public with this, they'll bury me." He nodded. "If you don't, they'll bury the truth." She paused, then smiled faintly. "Then I guess we both dig." The hum of old engines echoed faintly through the floor. Somewhere above, the city lights flickered against the night sky. For the first time since she'd stepped into Trafford Dynamics, Joanna felt something shift inside her. Not anger, not revenge. Resolve. As she stepped into the elevator, she caught her reflection in the steel doors. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned like her father's once had, the fire of someone who'd been underestimated for the last time. She whispered under her breath, "You wanted to silence him. You just gave him a louder voice." The elevator doors closed. And above her, in the CEO's penthouse office, James Trafford watched the same building he once ruled, realizing that the mechanic he mocked was holding the one thing he'd never mastered. The truth. Morning bled slowly into Trafford Dynamics. Sunlight spilled through the glass facade, glinting off chrome railings and spotless floors, everything polished, perfect, sterile. But beneath the gleam, the building felt different. Quiet. Like it knew a secret it could no longer keep. Joanna Micah walked through the lobby with a folder tucked under her arm. Inside were the documents Marcus had given her. Patent transfers, old blueprints, her father's signature. The truth weighed heavier than steel. Every step she took echoed in the silence. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Yesterday she was the miracle mechanic. Today she was something else, a rumor wrapped in authority. The security team at the elevator didn't stop her. Her access badge, mysteriously, now opened every floor. Someone had unlocked it overnight. James Trafford. He was waiting for her in the Eve 7 lab. The massive engine sat dormant on its pedestal, silver skin catching the light like an animal at rest. James stood beside it, hands clasped behind his back, his reflection warped in the curved metal. He looked tired, eyes shadowed, tie loosened. The arrogance that once filled the room seemed thinned, stretched. "Morning, Miss Micah," he said quietly. Or should I say, Miss Ezekiel Micah's daughter. Joanna didn't flinch. "So you read the files?" "I did." He turned to face her. "And for what it's worth, I didn't know. You signed the papers." "I sign a lot of papers." His voice cracked on the edge of defensiveness. "We buy hundreds of patents a year. Most are worthless. Except this one." She stepped closer, her voice low but steady. "Except the one that built your empire." James looked away. "It wasn't my intention." Intent doesn't erase theft. The words hit like a wrench dropped on concrete. The sound echoed. For a long moment neither spoke. The hum of the lab equipment filled the space between them. Faint, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Joanna laid the folder on the table and opened it, revealing the schematic her father had drawn a decade earlier. He called it the Adaptive Resonance Drive. You renamed it the Eve 7. You changed the casing, the AI interface, but the core, the harmonic synchronization algorithm, it's his. James ran a hand down his face, studying the papers. "I didn't know your father," he said softly. "But if this is true, then yes. Your father's genius built what my team couldn't." "No," Joanna said, eyes narrowing. "Your pride built what you couldn't understand." He met her gaze. "You think I don't understand engines?" "I think you don't understand people." She circled the machine slowly. "You see circuits and profit margins. My father saw connection. Machines don't respond to authority, Mr. Trafford. They respond to resonance. Harmony. You can't command that. You have to listen to it." The word listen hung between them, heavy, familiar. He watched her hand glide across the metal housing. "You fixed this thing by feel," he said. "No calibration tools. Just instinct." "It's not instinct," she said. "It's inheritance." James fell silent. For the first time in his career, the sound of confidence failed him. Joanna tapped the engine's surface lightly with a wrench. A soft vibration answered. Uneven, faint. "There," she said. "Hear that? It's out of phase again. The AI's feedback loop is reading in imperial units. The hardware's tuned for metric. They're arguing with each other, like a bilingual couple that refuses to translate." James frowned, leaning closer. "So all these failures, the overheating, the error codes, came from arrogance," she finished. "Your engineers assumed code was superior to calibration. They forgot the human side of precision." She adjusted a coupling, then straightened. "You built an empire on brilliance that wasn't yours, then surrounded yourself with people too afraid to tell you when something sounds wrong." Her words were a wrench to his chest. He'd heard criticisms before, from rivals, investors, employees, but never like this. Never from someone who wasn't trying to win. Joanna wasn't angry for herself. She was angry for what the machine had become, a monument to someone's silence. James sank onto a nearby stool, the reality settling like dust. "Your father deserved better," he said quietly. Joanna studied him. "So do I." The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was the heavy stillness before understanding. Two frequencies struggling to align. Finally James said, "Then let's make it right." Joanna blinked. "What?" He gestured to the engine. "You said it yourself. Machines respond to harmony. Maybe companies do too. Help me recalibrate the system. Make this engine work the way your father meant it to." She hesitated. "Why? So you can rebrand his invention again?" "No," he said, voice low, sincere. "So the world knows who really made it sing." Joanna watched him for a long moment, searching for deception. There was none. For the first time, she saw not the billionaire or the bully. Just a man stripped of his armor, standing in the ruins of his own making. She nodded once. "We start with rhythm." She motioned toward the diagnostic panel. "Run a cold start at 30% torque." He obeyed without question. The engine came alive, softly this time, the hum more human than mechanical. Joanna listened, eyes half closed, head tilted, attuned to the pulse. "Too high," she said. "Drop by half a hertz." He adjusted. The tone softened, deeper, steadier. "Now lock the sensor delay. 4 milliseconds. Listen." They stood side by side, listening as the sound evened out into a perfect harmonic wave. "There," Joanna whispered. "That's the rhythm." James exhaled, barely audible. "It's beautiful." "It's balance," she said. "Something you can't buy." The data on the screen turned green. For the first time since its creation, the Eve 7's performance graph stabilized. Flawless alignment, zero error. They both stared at it silent. James broke the quiet. "Tomorrow, the board's hosting a global investor event. I want you there. Run the full demo yourself. Show them what this engine really is." Joanna looked skeptical. "You realize that's your company's confession." He gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe it's time I confessed." As she gathered her tools, he said softly, "Joanna, your father would be proud." She paused in the doorway. "He'd be surprised you listened." He chuckled under his breath. "So would I." The lab lights dimmed behind her as she left. The machine kept humming, steady and strong, a perfect resonance between humility and steel. For the first time in years, Trafford Dynamics felt alive. The next morning, San Francisco glittered like it had dressed up for judgment. Every screen in Trafford Dynamics' glass tower glowed with the same headline: Global Investor Event. Live Engine Demonstration, 10 a.m. Hashtags were already trending. Hashtag Eve 7. Hashtag Mechanic Challenge. Hashtag TraffordBet. Some saw it as spectacle. Others smelled redemption or revenge. Inside the boardroom-turned-broadcast studio, technicians adjusted cameras while PR managers rehearsed lines. Rows of reporters sat ready with notebooks and hungry smiles. The hum of preparation filled the air like static before a storm. At the center of the room, the Eve 7 prototype stood gleaming, reborn. Its casing polished, wiring precise, the machine looked alive again. Next to it, Joanna Micah stood in her gray coveralls, sleeves rolled, calm as still water. And across from her, James Trafford waited in a dark suit, his usual arrogance replaced by something quieter, almost reverent. The world was watching. He wasn't the hero this time. She was. 5 minutes, called the producer. James glanced at Joanna. "You ready?" She smirked faintly. "You sure you are?" He exhaled a laugh. You're impossible. Only to men who underestimate me. The producer counted down from 30. The red light above the main camera blinked on. James stepped forward to the podium. His voice, steady but stripped of pride, filled the room and broadcast to 1 million live viewers. Good morning, everyone. Yesterday, Trafford Dynamics faced a crisis. Today, we face the truth. Murmurs rippled through the press row. He continued, the Eve 7 adaptive engine, the core of our next-generation technology, was failing. No algorithm, no PhD, no amount of code could keep it alive. Until one woman listened to it. She found what all our data missed, rhythm. He turned slightly toward Joanna. Meet Joanna Micah, the engineer who restored the Eve 7, and the daughter of the man whose early work inspired this design. Today, she'll lead this test, not as an employee, but as the rightful architect of its rebirth. Gasps filled the room. Cameras flashed. Somewhere, investors whispered, he's admitting it. Another replied, he's humanizing the company. Either way, Trafford had just done the unthinkable. Told the truth on live broadcast. Joanna approached the engine. The cameras zoomed in on her oil-stained fingers, steady as they brushed the control panel. Morning, she said softly, almost to herself. Let's show them what harmony sounds like. She looked up. Power to 30% torque, please. James nodded to the control techs. 30%. The machine hummed awake, a low, graceful tone. Not the shriek of malfunction, but a steady heartbeat of sound. The crowd quieted. Joanna adjusted the dial by hand. Too sharp. Drop it 0.5 hertz. James hesitated, then turned the knob himself. The sound softened. Good, she murmured. Now, align the phase delay, 4 milliseconds. The diagnostic screens glowed green across the wall. Every sensor, every graph, every vibration, aligned perfectly. Outside the building, in cafes, airports, and boardrooms around the world, people watched in silence. On one split screen, Joanna. Calm. Focused. On the other, James Trafford, the once untouchable CEO, now quietly following her lead. It wasn't just an engine test. It was a reversal of everything power used to mean. Start full cycle, Joanna said. The engine's hum deepened into a living rhythm, metal and light vibrating together. 1 minute. 2. 10. The infamous 14-minute and 37-second mark approached. Reporters leaned forward. Engineers held their breath. At 14 minutes, the hum remained steady. At 15, the diagnostic bars turned pure green. At 20, the entire room erupted. The Eve 7 had completed its first flawless run. Applause thundered through the room, echoing across the live stream. Social media exploded. Hashtag Eve 7 Alive hit 1 million mentions in 10 minutes. But Joanna barely moved. She kept her hand resting on the engine's casing, eyes closed, listening. Not to the noise, but to the heartbeat beneath it. Then she opened her eyes, turned to the cameras, and said, My father used to tell me, engines don't care who built them. They only care who listens. This machine was born from his hands, neglected by greed, and healed by truth. Today, it's not just an engine running, it's a voice restored. The room went silent. Even James looked down, humbled. She turned to him. Mr. Trafford, you once said you'd marry me if I fixed it. Laughter rippled through the crowd. James's ears flushed crimson. Joanna smiled faintly. You don't need to. You've already done something harder. You listened. The event ended with a standing ovation. Investors applauded. Engineers hugged. The world witnessed something rare. Redemption that didn't come from dominance, but from humility. As the broadcast closed, a journalist shouted, Ms. Micah, What's next for you? Joanna smiled. Rebuilding the garage that started it all, and opening it for others who never got a chance to be heard. Then she looked at James. With a little help from Trafford Dynamics. He nodded. Already approved. The crowd erupted again. Hours later, the building was quiet. The cameras were gone, the cheers faded. Joanna stood alone in the lab, gazing at the Eve 7 as it cooled. James walked in, no cameras this time, no press. Just two people and the soft ticking of metal. He stopped beside her. You saved my company. She shook her head. I fixed what your company broke. He smiled faintly. Same difference. No, she said. It's not. But it can be. He looked at her. Really looked, the grease on her cheek, the steadiness in her eyes. You're something else, Joanna Micah. She shrugged. So are engines. Once you learn to listen. They stood together, the hum of the city echoing through the glass. For the first time in his life, James didn't feel like the smartest man in the room. He felt like a student again. And she, the mechanic he once mocked, was his teacher. He reached out a hand. Partnership. She eyed it for a moment, then shook it. Partnership, she said. And as the lab lights dimmed, the Eve 7 gave one final soft pulse. Steady, strong, alive. It was more than a machine. It was an apology that could finally breathe. The morning after the demonstration, the world woke up to a new story. Every headline carried her name. Mechanic outsmarts billion-dollar CEO and saves his company. From garage to global stage, the woman who fixed what Silicon Valley broke. News outlets replayed the moment Joanna's engine came to life over and over. Her calm composure, the quote about listening, the faint smile when she handed Trafford his own humility. It was viral gold. And it was a storm James Trafford couldn't control. By 8 a.m., Trafford Dynamics lobby was packed with reporters. By 9 o'clock, the stock had jumped 6%. By noon, investors from 3 continents had requested meetings with Joanna Micah, not James. Inside the glass tower, the mood was electric and uneasy all at once. Employees whispered as she passed. Part awe, part fear, part pride. In one morning, the hierarchy had inverted. The woman they'd once mistaken for a janitor now carried the company's future in her hands. In the boardroom, James sat at the long table, watching the live newsfeed on the wall. His phone buzzed non-stop. Congratulatory texts, apology requests, investor invitations. None of it felt like victory. Across from him, the board of directors gathered, men and women who, 24 hours ago, would have bowed to his will. Now their expressions were measured. Studying him. At the head of the table, Dr. Farah Levinson, CTO and acting board chair, cleared her throat. James, she began gently, what happened yesterday was extraordinary. The technology works. The investors are ecstatic. But we can't ignore how it happened. He looked up, jaw tight. You mean the bet? Farah nodded. The optics are bad. A CEO humiliates an employee on livestream, and she saves him. It's poetic, yes. But it's also liability. The board's recommending an ethics review. He laughed once, low and bitter. Of course they are. James, Farah said softly, you built something remarkable. But maybe this is the moment to rebuild it right. He met her eyes. You mean rebuild me? Maybe both. Downstairs, Joanna stood by the observation window overlooking the bay. The city shimmered below, sharp-edged, alive, indifferent. She sipped black coffee from a paper cup, staring at the reflection of the skyline in the glass. Marcus Layton approached, clutching a folder. You're trending on every major platform. You've become a symbol. Joanna chuckled. Symbols don't pay rent. Investors want you to lead a division, he said. Farah's pushing for a systems integration department. Your design philosophy as its foundation. She raised an eyebrow. My design philosophy. Marcus grinned. Listening. Her expression softened. My father would have liked that. He hesitated. So would Trafford. Joanna turned. You think he deserves that kind of redemption? Marcus shrugged. I think he's trying to earn it. That's more than most men like him ever do. Upstairs, the ethics hearing was brief. James stood at the far end of the boardroom, facing 12 members seated in silence. Cameras were off, but the judgment was very much live. Mr. Trafford, said Farah, you've admitted to authorizing the bet and to the prior acquisition of the mica patent without acknowledgement. Do you have anything to add before the board votes on disciplinary action? James straightened his tie, but his voice was steady, stripped of ego. Yes, he said. Everything you're saying is true. I made the bet to humiliate her. I built this company on control. But the truth is, she built the engine that saved us. She earned her respect the way I should have earned mine. He paused. So if you're asking for punishment, I'll take it. But if you're asking for leadership, give it to her. The room went quiet. Farah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you, James. The board will deliberate. He turned to leave. No fight. No defense. Just acceptance. That evening, Joanna returned to the lab. The Eve 7 sat in stillness, lights dimmed, faintly humming as though breathing in sleep. James was there alone. He looked up when she entered. You're hard to find, she said. Trying not to be, he replied with a half-smile. They stood a few feet apart, the hum between them steady and low. The board's reviewing my position, he said. Could be suspension. Could be removal. Haven't decided yet. She folded her arms. And what do you want? He thought for a long moment. For the first time. Not control. Just clarity. She nodded. Clarity's earned. Same as respect. Then maybe I'm finally earning it. He walked toward the engine, resting a hand on its frame. Your father's name will go on the patent. I'll make sure of it. I've already called legal. Joanna blinked. You did that before the hearing? Before the live stream ended, he said quietly. You deserved the credit before I deserved forgiveness. For the first time she smiled, small real. He'd appreciate that. James looked at her. What about you? I'm still deciding, she said. But this engine's proof enough for now. Later that night, a press release hit the networks. Trafford Dynamics announces new systems integration division, led by Joanna Mica. Company commits to restoring lost credits to original inventors. James Trafford to step down temporarily as CEO pending review. The comments section exploded. Some praised. Some mocked. Most simply watched the fall and rise of two unlikely partners in one corporate heartbeat. By midnight, the building was empty again. Joanna stood by the window of the R&D lab, watching the fog roll across the bay. Behind her, the Eve 7 hummed quietly, the sound of balance of something reborn. James joined her at the window. His reflection hovered beside hers in the glass. You know, he said softly, I used to think leadership meant never being questioned. That power was a voice that silenced everything else. She glanced at him. And now? He smiled faintly. Now I think power's just the ability to listen longer than anyone else. She tilted her head. Took you long enough. He chuckled. I had a good teacher. They stood in silence as the fog lifted and the city lights flickered back to life. In the quiet, Joanna spoke, more to herself than to him. Engines don't run forever. They need rest. Realignment. So do people. James nodded. Then maybe it's time I learn that too. She turned toward the lab, where the hum of the Eve 7 filled the air like a steady heartbeat. You already have, she said. You just needed to hear it. 6 months later, Detroit sang again. Not the hollow rattle of factories past, but something new, a hum of restoration. The old mica garage, once boarded up and forgotten, now glowed beneath a freshly painted sign. The Mica Institute for Mechanical Arts. Innovation begins with listening. Inside, students gathered around open engines and circuit boards, laughter mixing with the rhythmic clank of tools. The smell of oil and coffee filled the air. And at the center of it all stood Joanna Mica, her sleeves rolled up, guiding a group of wide-eyed apprentices. Don't force it, she said, steadying a young man's hand as he tightened a bolt. Engines are like people. Push too hard, they seize up. Listen, and they tell you what they need. The boy smiled, adjusting until the hum evened out. Joanna grinned. That's it. You hear it now. He nodded. Yeah. Like it's breathing. Exactly, she said. Every machine has a heartbeat. So do you. Never forget that. On the wall behind her hung 2 framed patents. One read, Eve 8, Self-Harmonizing Adaptive Engine. Beneath it, 2 names, Joanna Mica and James Trafford. The second was older, yellowed but carefully restored. Adaptive Resonance Drive. Inventor, Ezekiel Mica. Joanna sometimes caught herself staring at that one. Not with sadness anymore, but gratitude. It had taken years, generations, and heartbreak for her father's heartbeat to be heard. Now it would never be silenced again. A low hum rolled through the building, the sound of the Eve 8 prototype warming up in the adjoining lab. Joanna walked over to check the readings. The interface glowed a soft blue, the machine purring like something alive. It wasn't just efficient. It was aware. The AI learned from vibration instead of code, adjusting itself through sound. It no longer relied on perfect numbers but on perfect rhythm. The same principle her father had once drawn in pencil. The same principle Trafford had once dismissed, until he learned to hear it too. A knock echoed from the garage door. Joanna wiped her hands on her apron and opened it. James Trafford stood outside, older in spirit but lighter in presence. The sharp suit was gone, replaced by rolled sleeves, jeans, and a humility that fit him better than any Armani. He smiled. Heard the hum from the street. Still the sweetest sound in Detroit. Joanna raised an eyebrow. You sure you're not just saying that because it's half your patent now? He chuckled. Half. I'd say I'm lucky to have my name on it at all. Good answer, she said, letting him in. Coffee. Please. Black. No sugar. I've had enough of sweet talk from investors. They stood by the workbench as the machine thrummed softly nearby. James glanced around at the students, a handful of young women and men from trade schools and community programs, all wearing coveralls with the Mica Institute logo stitched on the sleeve. You really built it, he said quietly. A place for those who never got one. Joanna nodded. My father used to say genius has grease under its nails. So that's who we take, the ones who listen with their hands first. He smiled faintly. Trafford Dynamics has been funding community programs like this across the country now. You started something bigger than both of us. She shot him a look. Don't get sentimental, James. You're allergic to humility. He laughed, genuine and unguarded. Used to be. Then he looked toward the engine, expression softening. But what you did, it changed more than my company. It changed me. They walked together toward the Eve 8, watching its panels pulse with harmonic light. It's not just a machine anymore, Joanna said. It's a teacher. Every time it stabilizes itself, it records the resonance pattern, learns, and recalibrates. James tilted his head. Like people then. Trial and correction. She smiled. Exactly. He studied the data readout. What's its current tolerance? 0 error margin. It's perfect. James shook his head. Nothing's perfect. Joanna turned to him. It's not the machine that's perfect, James. It's the harmony between the parts. That's what perfection really is. Balance. He looked at her, realization dawning. Balance between people too, I suppose. Now you're learning, she teased. Took you long enough. The two stood in silence, the engine humming between them like a shared memory. After a while, James asked, So, the famous bet. You ever regret that it happened? Joanna chuckled. Regret? No. I just wish you'd picked a better line. He winced. Fair. Not exactly my proudest moment. Maybe not, she said softly. But sometimes arrogance builds the bridge that humility has to cross. If you hadn't mocked me, I might never have had the chance to fix what was broken. In that engine and in you. James smiled, eyes distant. So what now? Do I keep showing up here like an unpaid intern? She shrugged. If you can make coffee and stop giving unsolicited lectures on synergy, maybe. He laughed. Deal. As the sun dipped low, golden light spilled through the wide garage doors. The students packed up for the day, waving goodbye. When the last one left, Joanna walked to the engine and rested her hand on its side. The vibration beneath her palm was steady, warm, alive. She whispered, still singing Dad. James watched quietly, hands in his pockets, the faintest smile on his lips. You know, he said, when people ask how we make it work, I tell them the truth. Oh yeah, she said, still looking at the engine. What's that? That she taught me that leadership isn't about knowing more, it's about listening better. Joanna turned, smiling. And I tell them engines don't care about status. Neither should people. They both laughed, the kind that comes only after everything that needed breaking has been rebuilt. Outside, the Detroit skyline shimmered against the evening haze. Inside, the Eve 8 hummed in perfect rhythm, its light reflecting off the walls like heartbeat waves. In that sound was the echo of everything that had brought them here. Arrogance, loss, redemption, and the quiet truth that power and humility could, after all, coexist. The rhythm grew softer, steady, alive. A pulse that carried not just electricity, but legacy. The heartbeat of steel, and of those who finally learned to listen. The end.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.